And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much. Not least of all because the monarchy is about continuity. But I think for my brother, this is something he's been waiting for.
There are moments in the life of a monarchy when the polished surface cracks, not because of a scandal, not because of political pressure, but because of something far more intimate, the weight of memory and the question of who is truly entrusted to carry it forward. This is one of those moments. At the center of it is a collection of sapphires, deep, oceanic blue, cut in the mid-19th century, given with a father's trembling love, worn for 7 decades through state banquets, diplomatic dinners, coronations, and jubilees. To the world, they were jewels. But inside the palace walls, they were something else entirely. They were Queen Elizabeth II herself, her identity, her history, her silent signature worn on the chest and resting against the collarbone through the greatest and most solemn chapters of a 70-year reign. And now, according to a growing tide of royal commentary and speculation, those same sapphires have become the center of a fierce internal confrontation, one that pits the fierce, uncompromising loyalty of Princess and against the complicated reality of Queen Camilla's family circle, and specifically against the woman at the quiet edge of that circle, Camilla's daughter Laura Lopez. Whether this story ends in resolution or in lasting fracture may tell us more about the modern monarchy than any number of official press releases ever could. Tonight, we go deeper into the royal collection, into the legacy of a queen, and into the battle now being fought, not with words in public, but with the weight of tradition, duty, and a set of sapphires that have never truly belonged to anyone but history itself. To understand what is truly at stake, you must first understand what the sapphires actually are, and what they meant to the woman who wore them. The story begins in November 1947. The Second World War had ended only 2 years earlier. Britain was still recovering, still rebuilding, still processing grief on a national scale. But on the 20th of that month, Westminster Abbey was transformed for a royal wedding. Princess Elizabeth, 21 years old and already carrying the gravity of her future crown, was preparing to marry Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. Among the avalanche of wedding gifts the couple received, one stood apart in its intimacy. Her father, King George VI, a man who had never wanted the throne but had worn it with extraordinary moral courage through the darkest years in living memory, gave his daughter a suite of sapphire and diamond jewels. According to royal historian Lauren Keena of the Court Jeweler, the necklace and earrings were antique pieces dating to approximately 1850, purchased at Carrington & Company, their emerald-cut sapphires framed in diamonds, brilliant and deep. Noel Coward, who saw them up close, reportedly described the gems as the largest sapphires I had ever seen. The gift was more than jewelry. King George VI was unwell. His health was deteriorating in ways that both he and his family understood. He was giving his daughter something that would outlast him, something she could wear as queen when he was no longer there to see it. And that is precisely what she did. Almost immediately after becoming queen in February 1952, Elizabeth began wearing the sapphires at the most significant moments of her reign. But they were not yet complete. In 1963, 11 years after her coronation, she acquired a 19th-century necklace from the collection of the Belgian Princess Louise of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, a piece with a scandalous history all its own, its original owner having famously fled her husband for a Croatian cavalry officer and died in poverty. Elizabeth, with characteristically quiet authority, had the necklace reset onto a tiara frame by the royal jewelers. The Belgian sapphire tiara was born. Now the collection was a true parure: tiara, necklace, earrings, bracelet, each piece harmonizing with the others, each carrying its own history, all of it unified under the Queen's personal touch. She wore them at state banquets in Brussels, in Berlin, in Washington. She wore them at diplomatic receptions at Buckingham Palace. She wore the full suite for official portraits that would appear in galleries and government buildings across the Commonwealth. And then, in 2017, she wore them for what would become one of the most symbolically powerful images of her entire reign. For her Sapphire Jubilee, marking 65 years on the throne, the official portrait showed Queen Elizabeth II, 91 years old and still commanding absolute attention, wearing the complete sapphire set. The image required no caption. The sapphires did the speaking. These were not decorations. They were testimony. Queen Elizabeth II died on the 8th of September, 2022, at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. She was 96 years old. Her daughter, Princess Anne, was present at her side in those final hours, a fact that and herself has described with quiet emotional depth, calling it a profound honor to accompany her mother on that final journey. In the weeks and months that followed, the palace moved carefully and deliberately through the enormous practical and symbolic work of transition. And within that transition, one of the most closely watched questions, by royal observers, historians, and the general public alike, was what would happen to Queen Elizabeth's personal jewelry collection. The answer, in part, became visible relatively quickly. In November 2022, at the South African State Banquet at Buckingham Palace, the first state visit hosted under King Charles III, Queen Camilla appeared wearing the Belgian sapphire tiara and the King George VI sapphire necklace. Royal commentators confirmed this was the first time these iconic pieces had been worn by anyone other than Queen Elizabeth II. According to detailed records maintained by royal jewelry historians at sites like the Royal Watcher and the Court Jeweler, Camilla wore the tiara without the matching earrings. Her ears are not pierced, pairing it instead with other pieces. 2 weeks later, she wore the combination again at the diplomatic reception at Buckingham Palace, this time incorporating more elements of the suite, including the pendant. Palace officials framed these appearances as entirely appropriate. Queen Camilla, as Queen Consort and now Queen, has legitimate access to major pieces from the royal collection. The sapphires are among the most historically significant jewels in that collection, and wearing them publicly is itself an act of continuity, a message that the institution endures, that the symbols of the crown carry forward. But among certain royal observers and, according to insiders, within certain corners of the royal family itself, the speed and visibility of the transition was noted. The sapphires had been so closely associated with Queen Elizabeth personally, worn not just at formal occasions but as a kind of visual signature, that seeing them redeployed so quickly prompted quiet reflection about what the line was between honoring a predecessor and stepping into her symbolic space. That quiet reflection, sources suggest, has over time intensified into something sharper. To understand the controversy now circulating in royal commentary circles, one must understand who Laura Lopez is, and, more importantly, who she is not. Laura Rose Lopez, born on the 19th of April 1978, is Queen Camilla's daughter from her first marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles, a retired British Army officer. She has a brother, Tom Parker Bowles, who is a well-known food critic and author. Laura herself built her professional life as an art curator, a career defined by culture, expertise, and her own intellectual engagement, rather than by any association with royal privilege. She is, as Wikipedia and multiple biographical sources confirm, a private citizen. She holds no royal title. She carries no constitutional role within the monarchy. She is the stepdaughter of King Charles III, but she is not a working royal. She is not on the civil list. She does not undertake royal engagements in any official capacity. This matters enormously in the context of what is now being discussed. Laura has, over the years, made occasional appearances at royal family events, most notably at Sandringham for Christmas gatherings, which are typically reserved for the closer royal circle. Her daughter Eliza was a bridesmaid at the 2011 wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton. Her twin sons, Gus and Louis, served as pages of honor at Queen Camilla's coronation in 2023. These are not the actions of someone completely outside royal life. But they are also not the actions of someone who considers herself part of the institution. By all accounts, Laura has deliberately chosen distance from the public-facing machinery of the monarchy. Reports suggest that this distance is partly temperamental, she prefers a quiet life, and partly a product of the complicated emotional history surrounding her mother's relationship with King Charles, a relationship that unfolded against the backdrop of the breakdown of the marriage between Charles and Princess Diana. That history created fractures that have taken decades to heal, and some, it seems, have never fully closed. It is within this context that questions about royal jewelry become acutely sensitive. Royal jewels held in the Crown's collection are not private possessions in any ordinary sense. They are not heirlooms to be distributed casually among relatives. They are institutional symbols, managed under strict royal protocols, their significance tied not to any individual's personal affection but to the office of the Crown itself. This is a distinction that has been maintained through generations of monarchs, and it is a distinction that commentators note becomes especially important in transitional periods, when a monarch has recently died and the chain of custody for historic pieces is in flux. According to circulating reports and informed royal commentary, concerns have emerged that certain sapphire pieces from Queen Elizabeth's private collection, pieces associated with her personal rather than state collection, may have become accessible within a broader family environment that extends beyond the direct royal line. Laura Lopez's name has appeared in this context. It must be stated clearly and honestly. Queen Elizabeth II's will and the specific distribution of her personal jewelry remain sealed. The palace has made no official statement confirming or denying any of the claims. This is the nature of the story. It operates in the space between documented fact and credible speculation in the way that all discussions of royal private affairs inevitably do. What can be said with confidence is this: the legal and institutional framework around the royal collection is clearly established. As confirmed by multiple royal legal commentators, items from the royal collection cannot be bequeathed outside the royal family. Personal pieces belonging to the monarch may be distributed differently, but even these are typically managed with sensitivity toward the institution's traditions. The suggestion that any piece strongly associated with Queen Elizabeth's royal legacy might drift toward private civilian ownership, regardless of how closely related that individual is to the current queen, is, by the standards of royal protocol, deeply irregular. There is perhaps no one in the British royal family better positioned, temperamentally, emotionally, and historically, to take a stand on this issue than Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, and has spent more than 5 decades building a reputation that stands somewhat apart from the usual royal profile. She is not defined by glamour. She is not a figure of soft diplomacy or carefully managed public relations. She is defined by something rarer and more demanding: genuine, uncompromising commitment to duty. She is consistently one of the busiest members of the royal household, undertaking hundreds of engagements per year, most of them far from the media spotlight, many of them involving causes she has championed for decades: equestrian sports, children's health, international development. But beneath the professional reputation lies something more personal and more powerful: Anne's relationship with her mother. By all accounts, Anne and Queen Elizabeth shared an exceptional bond, one forged not just by blood but by shared values, shared temperament, and a shared understanding of what the crown demands. Anne was present at Balmoral during her mother's final hours, and in the days and weeks that followed, she carried herself with a composure that drew widespread admiration while also leaving no doubt that the grief was profound. She has spoken movingly of what it meant to accompany her mother on that final journey. Since the Queen's passing, those who know and well suggest that her sense of guardianship, always strong, has deepened into something closer to sacred obligation. For Anne, her mother's legacy is not an abstraction. It is a living thing, embodied in every heirloom, every tradition, every symbolic object that carries the mark of a 70-year reign. And herself is no stranger to sapphires as vehicles of memory. She personally wears several significant sapphire pieces with direct connections to Queen Elizabeth. A sapphire and diamond brooch once worn extensively by Queen Elizabeth now appears regularly in Anne's public appearances. The 4-strand pearl choker with a sapphire and diamond clasp, which royal jewelry expert Maxwell Stone estimates at approximately £200,000 in value, originated with Empress Marie Fyodorovna of Russia and passed through Queen Mary before Queen Elizabeth II gave it to Anne. When and wears these pieces, she is not merely accessorizing. She is performing an act of memory, of continuity, of personal loyalty to the women who came before her. This is the person who, according to reports, took issue with what was allegedly happening with certain sapphire pieces from Queen Elizabeth's private collection. Sources familiar with palace dynamics suggest that and expressed strong and direct disapproval, in her characteristically unequivocal way, to those connected to the situation involving Laura Lopez. The concern, as articulated by those close to Anne, was not personal animosity toward Laura as an individual. It was something more principled, that items carrying the weight of Queen Elizabeth's specific royal identity should not drift, however informally, into private possession outside the direct royal line. That the chain of royal custody, maintained across generations, should not be casually broken in the emotional and procedural complexity of a post-accession transition. Whether the confrontation was as dramatic as some accounts suggest, or more measured than the language of forced return implies, the underlying principle appears to have been stated clearly and firmly. These pieces belong to the crown's story, and that story does not end with the monarch who wore them. The broader context for this controversy lies in what royal historians have long understood about the sheer scale and secrecy of Queen Elizabeth II's personal jewelry collection. The collection is, by any measure, extraordinary. Royal historians estimate that Queen Elizabeth owned more than 300 individual jewelry pieces during her reign. These ranged from the iconic and frequently photographed, the Belgian sapphire tiara, the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, the Cullinan diamonds, to pieces that were rarely, if ever, seen in public, kept in royal vaults at Balmoral, Sandringham, and Windsor, surfacing only in private settings or highly selective occasions known to a small circle of insiders. This is not unusual for a monarch of Elizabeth's stature and length of reign. Jewelry flowed toward her from every direction across 7 decades, gifts from visiting heads of state, inherited pieces from Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth the Queen. Mother, wedding presents, jubilee commemorations, personal purchases, items with histories stretching back to Victoria, to the Russian imperial court, to the courts of Belgium and the Netherlands. Some of it she wore repeatedly and publicly. Much of it she wore rarely or never. The opacity of this collection has always been, in some ways, deliberate. Royal jewels function partly as instruments of soft power, their value, their rarity, and the mystery surrounding them contributing to an aura of institutional depth that benefits the monarchy. But that same opacity creates complexity when a monarch dies. Queen Elizabeth II will, along with the specific itemization of her personal jewelry, is sealed and will not be made public for decades. This is consistent with royal practice. The wills of royal family members are typically sealed to protect privacy, but it also means that the exact disposition of hundreds of pieces remains unknown to the public, and the room for uncertainty, rumor, and concern is consequently vast. What is known is that Camilla, as queen, has legitimate access to major pieces that form part of the working royal collection, and she has worn them, visibly and appropriately. What is less clear, and what has generated the current wave of commentary, is whether any pieces from the more private, personal side of Queen Elizabeth's collection may have moved into broader family circulation in ways that bypass traditional royal protocols. For Princess Anne, whose knowledge of her mother's personal belongings was intimate and detailed, any such movement would be immediately apparent. And apparently, it was. Step back from the immediate story, the sapphires, the alleged confrontation, the question of custody, and what becomes visible is something larger. The death of Queen Elizabeth II created a gravitational shift in the British monarchy that continues to be felt. For 70 years, Elizabeth was the fixed point around which everything else orbited. Her identity, her authority, her personal presence were so deeply embedded in the institution that the institution and the individual had become, for many purposes, inseparable. Her jewelry was part of this, not incidentally, but essentially. Now the monarchy is reorganizing itself. It is determining, in both symbolic and practical terms, what carries forward and in what form. Every public appearance by Queen Camilla wearing Elizabeth sapphires is a statement about continuity. Every piece that Princess Anne wears from her mother's collection is a statement about loyalty and memory. Every question about where certain pieces have gone, or might go, is a question about who gets to define the story of the reign that just ended. Royal commentators have noted the growing significance of Catherine, Princess of Wales, in this context. There is informed speculation that certain important royal heirlooms, including pieces from the Sapphire collection, may ultimately be intended for Catherine and, eventually, her daughter Princess Charlotte. This would represent a clear and traditional line of transmission, from one queen to the next, through the direct line of succession. It would preserve the symbolic integrity of the collection by keeping it tied to the crown's future rather than distributing it across the extended family. Princess Anne, by all indications, is among those most committed to ensuring that transmission happens as intended, and that nothing is diverted from that path, however inadvertently, in the complicated emotional landscape of the post-Elizabeth transition. This is not, ultimately, a story about enmity toward Laura Lopez, who has never sought publicity, never claimed a royal role, and who exists at the periphery of royal life by her own considered choice. It is a story about the enormous institutional pressure that builds up around the symbols of a great reign, and about what happens when private family dynamics collide with the unyielding demands of royal tradition. Queen Elizabeth herself understood this better than anyone. She spent 7 decades ensuring that the monarchy's symbols, its ceremonies, its jewels, its visual language, carried meaning that transcended any individual. She wore the sapphires her father gave her not merely because they were beautiful, but because wearing them was an act of testimony to his love, to her commitment, and to the continuity of something larger than herself. That is the inheritance Princess Anne is fighting to protect. And that is why this confrontation, however it ultimately resolves, carries weight far beyond the intrinsic value of any individual jewel. The British monarchy has always operated on 2 levels simultaneously: the visible and the concealed, the ceremonial and the deeply personal, the public performance of stability and the private wrestling with loyalty, grief, and power. These 2 levels rarely intersect openly. But occasionally, as in this story, they do. The sapphires at the center of this controversy are not missing. They are not the subject of any known criminal investigation. The palace has issued no statement, confirmed no dispute, acknowledged no confrontation. In the strict official record, there is nothing to report. But in the unofficial record, in the careful tracking of royal jewelry appearances, in the informed commentary of those who understand how the palace works, in the quiet signals that institutions send when something has gone unexpectedly, there is a story unfolding that speaks to the deepest questions about the modern monarchy. Who owns a legacy? Who is entrusted to carry it? What is the difference between a family heirloom and a symbol of the crown? And what happens when those two categories blur? Princess and, it appears, has her answers. They are not uncertain, and they are not negotiable. She is her mother's daughter in the truest sense, not because she inherited her mother's jewels, but because she inherited her mother's unshakable sense of what those jewels represent. The sapphires began as a gift from a father to a daughter, given in love at the threshold of a great journey. They became, over 70 years, something more than gemstones. They became a mark of dedication, a symbol of an era, a visual record of a life lived entirely in service. Whether they now rest in a royal vault, whether they are being quietly returned, or whether the story remains unresolved, one thing is certain: Princess and will not let their meaning be diminished. Not while she draws breath. Not while she remembers.